Have you ever watched a television program or a YouTube video and thought, that's a really bad idea? That's not going to turn out well. In our previous lessons, we've seen Israel and their bad ideas. Well, in this lesson, we get to see Israel coming face to face that this isn't turning out right.
In this session, we pick up where we left off. If you remember, God had created this divine kingdom. The first king being Saul, not so great. The second king being David, super great, man after God's own heart, though far from perfect in himself. Then we get to Solomon, who started great and ended poorly. And in the last session, we talked about kind of the aftermath. The reality that Solomon's sons didn't follow. Solomon's son decided to do his own thing, to be harsh to the people, and that ultimately the kingdom of Israel was divided. That's where we pick up this session with this divided kingdom. 10 tribes up north, 2 tribes down south, and a series of events that are going to happen thereafter. See, rebelling against God has consequences. We don't like to talk about those much because we'd prefer to think that we can self-govern, that we can self-rule, that we can do whatever we want. But the reality is God is. God is the creator of everything. God is the one who put the rules in place. God is the one who needs to be honored and praised and obeyed, and not doing so has consequences. We've already seen one of those, right, with the separation of the 2 kingdoms. There's now not one Israel. There's 10 tribes and 2 tribes. This session, what we see is that bad things are going to continue to happen. See, in the northern tribes, the northern people of Israel and their capital, Samaria, which will have some implications later as we get into the New Testament and we begin to hear these stories about the Samaritans. Well, the Samaritans were the people of the northern tribes. Samaria was their capital. Those people enter into a series of bad kings being determined by not following Yahweh. In fact, the northern people have 0, did you catch that? 0 good kings. All of them are bad. All of them lead the people away from God. They intermarry, they become problematic, they worship false gods. It's why the people in the New Testament dislike the Samaritans so intensely. God triggers a series of events that will ultimately cause the complete and total collapse of the northern kingdom. His chosen instrument are the people of Assyria. The Assyrians attack and invade the northern kingdom. They carry off the people. They divide the kingdom. God destroys cities and ultimately the whole nation. But here's what's interesting about the northern tribe, especially as we contrast it to the southern tribes here in just a minute. The northern peoples are scattered. They lose relationship with one another. They're separated. So not only is the land lost and the people taken into captivity, but the people are separated from one another. There's no hope of restoration to the northern people. The promises that God made to Abraham, at least as far as the northern people are concerned, are lost forever. Now, the southern tribes, they're a slightly different thing. The southern tribes are where David and his family were from, and so the promise is going to stay a little stronger there, it seems. The kings in the southern kingdom sometimes mirror the kings of the northern kingdom, meaning they're not that stellar and they lead people away from Yahweh. But at least in the south, we have a sprinkling in of good kings, of kings that desire to obey Yahweh, enough so that they kind of keep Yahweh, at least keep Israel, at least for a while, focused on the worship of Yahweh. But ultimately, even that isn't enough. God desires obedience, and there are consequences for not being obedient. In the south, God God uses Babylon, the Babylonians, who while initially are kind of pushed back, ultimately prevail. They conquer the southern people. They conquer Jerusalem, the capital of the southern kingdom. But here something different happens. Here the people are actually taken in large mass to Babylon. It's called the Babylonian captivity. Now this is different than the northern kingdom, because the northern kingdom, in the Assyrian captivity, the people are kind of scattered and intermarried, but in the southern kingdom, they're taken more as a whole people, and they're enslaved in Babylon. So here, while the land is lost and while things don't look good for the promises given to Abraham, there's at least hope. The people are together. Yeah, the blessings of land may be lost, but the people are together and could potentially be restored, returned to this land that God had promised Abraham. In this session, we see the full outlay of the ramifications of disobeying God, the consequences of disobeying God. In the north, we see them as absolute, and in the south, they sure look pretty dark. It leaves God's people with questions of, what about this promise that God has made? Where's our trust supposed to be placed? Did God let us down? Now we know, because we know the whole story, that God doesn't, that God preserves this momentum moving forward that we see ultimately coming to fulfillment in Jesus. But at that time, it looked pretty dark. It looked like the consequences would consume them. That maybe Yahweh had just simply abandoned his people.
Today we're going to look at full-blown rebellion against God and the consequences that happen. We're also going to take a look at God's love and mercy for his people, even in the midst of that rebellion. We hope that you enjoy your time together.